Well, good morning, Tom.
Is it though?
It is. You always ask the rhetorical questions.
You know what? I find the best way to deal with a question you don't know the answer to is to respond with a question.
This is true. This is true. Well, I appreciate you joining me. Kind of last second kind of thing. We're just going to wing this, but since you are a subject matter expert, or at least I call you a subject matter expert on our topic, which is reloading.
And we might need to set something straight there.
Okay.
I'm a little leery of the term expert. Can we say a subject matter hasn't blown himself up yet?
Okay.
Reloading authority?
Yep.
Okay.
You can do that.
We got to be accurate. I mean, this is media. This is journalisming. So,
yeah. Oh, really? This is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you joining me. And today we're doing something different. We're doing this on online video, so folks can actually see the man behind the blue microphone and Tom in his super cool deluxe man cave in the swamps of South Carolina.
Secret location.
Yeah.
We're coming to you from 300 feet underground. We're beneath the swamps. That's how discreet we are.
I hope your sump pump works.
Exactly.
Well, today, like I said, we're going to talk about reloading, and let me get my story out in front of this. The fact that I'm not an avid reloader, and I've made reference to this in the past. I've written a couple of stories about it. It's funny. My background's law enforcement. So A, you're never allowed to use hand loads, reloads in law enforcement. And B, I was on SWAT and all that. So I generally had all the ammunition I needed. So reloading was never really a thing with me. So when I became the editor of this illustrious magazine, and our former boss, Roy, he was, so what do you like to reload? And I said, nothing. And he was
my
horrified.
Drink.
Yeah, exactly. And he was horrified by that. So you guys, you and Roy have slowly dragged me into the realm of hand loading, but I thought this would be a good time. It's actually probably the worst time in the history of man to reload because it's hard to get product, raw materials. But I think there's a new renaissance of hand loading. I've had so many people talk to me about doing it, wanting to learn it. So that's why I thought today, Tom, I've already made some mistakes, but I'm going to ask questions that I probably should have asked you beforehand, and then maybe you can set me straight. So the goal today is if somebody's starting from zero, maybe we can get them at least to where they can make stuff that goes bang and they don't blow themselves up.
Hey, that sounds like a great plan. I am all for it.
Okay.
You know what? It is unfortunate that it's always the ammo droughts where we say, hey, I had to take up reloading. So here's the key. This is not a great time to buy components and such. So get started with the hardware now and a little bit of components. And then when things chill out in a few months or next year or whenever it is, just kind of gradually stock up on the stuff you need for the next drought. So you'll be shooting happily away while everyone else is paying $19 per round for 9mm.
Exactly. Well, and I will say that in my experience, the stuff is available. You got to look for it, and it's awfully expensive compared to 2 years ago, but it's out there. So if you're just buying small quantities to kind of get into it and experiment like I'm doing, you can still find some stuff. And friends have been great. Somebody will meet you in a parking lot, flash your lights, and, you pull up the window and they give you 50 small rifle primers, so it's.
That's right. For a sack of unmarked bills.
Exactly.
Hey, but this brings up a good point. This, we're talking two things. So components, yes, you got to do the drug deals to get components, but hardware, building out your bench, which we should talk about, at some point today.
Yeah.
I don't think there's really much of a difference there. The stuff's available. It's, now not counting supply chain craziness and just general shortage of everything.
Right.
It's priced kind of like it always has been. If you need a press and dies and scales and all those little accessories and tools, this is a great time to buy that, or as good a time as any.
Sure. Well, that leads into really our first topic. And you were the one that when we were discussing this, you said, let's talk about what you need and what you want, because this is one of those things like just about anything that guys get involved with. You fill rooms full of stuff. You could have a room like what you're sitting in with every kind of G-jaw and gimmick and gimcrack. I'm trying to think of those words that you could possibly want. And I'm struggling with this now. I know a few things I need, but do I really need, X, Y, and Z to just reload some handgun rounds? So let's do that. Let's start with, what do you absolutely, positively, minimum required equipment list need to start loading revolver or semi-auto rounds?
This is a great point. And I would draw a quick analogy. It's like building out your tool set, right? You can start, on day one, you can start with a hammer and duct tape, because as you and I both know, you can fix anything. You can fix anything with a hammer and duct tape, right?
Exactly.
It may be less than ideal, but you can get the job done. So how about if we do this? How about if we kind of talk through the process? And as we go through that, we can talk about the gotta haves and the nice to haves and that kind of thing. Maybe help people start to build out their toolkit.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, so cleaning brass. This is important, and I think this is one of the areas where details matter. Your brass doesn't need to look clean. It just, and I'm talking about spent brass that you're going to reload, right? That's the reusable part. That's fortunately, well, in normal times, that's the expensive part. So you want to reuse it. And, since we're talking pistol reloading, you can generally, exceptions apply, but you can generally reuse a piece of brass somewhere like 10 times, sometimes more, sometimes less. It wears out like anything else, but it's got to be clean, and it doesn't have to look shiny and new and perfect. It just needs to not junk up your reloading dies and get stuck in your pistol because it's got a 1/4 inch of mud caked on it, or burnt carbon or whatever that is.
You've seen my reloads.
Well, I do like shiny reloads, so I kind of clean mine pretty good just because it makes me happy. But you don't need to. So this is a great point where you can get started without all the expensive brass clean. You can literally get a bucket with a lid and shake your brass in it with, a little Dawn and hot water, right, to get all the junk off.
Yep.
And pour it out, let it dry in the sun for a day or two, and you're good to go, right? Because you just want to get the foreign material off of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's your bare minimum, right? Is a bucket and, stealing some dish soap from the kitchen.
Yeah. So anybody can afford that, even a magazine editor.
Exactly. So, and we've done that, it works. So, but you can definitely take a step up from that. There's a couple of common ways to clean your brass. There's tumbler systems that kind of vibrate with what we call media, crushed up corn cob, dried out corn cobs or walnuts or some synthetic material. And you pour a bunch of brass in this tumbler tub, and you're cleaning media in there, and you put a lid on it and you let it run for a couple hours, and it gradually just scrapes and polishes all the gunk off and makes sure it gets your brass pretty clean.
Yeah.
And, that's relatively inexpensive to get started. You buy or source your media, from the pet store or reloading supply place or your local gun store. And you can use it a bunch of times before it just gets too filthy to where you have to change it out. Yeah. So that's method A.
Well, now you've got clean cases. Let's get into the actual loading part. And I will say, before we get there, the easiest, simplest, least expensive way of doing it is a Lee loader. And I've done that, and it works pretty good. Have you messed around with that much?
I have not used a Lee load-all. I'm a big fan of single stage reloading presses. I'm not completely familiar with the load-all. Is that the hand version, or is that kind of a single stage?
No, that's the little kit that comes, and you basically have a die that you use a mallet and you pound it to, I think it just resizes the mouth, and then
okay.
You seat the dies by pounding, which is scary the first couple of times you do it, but so far I've never had any issues. I always wear safety glasses, of course, but no, it works pretty good. I use it. I've not used the handgun versions. I've used the rifle versions, and I'm still here in both eyes and everything. So it works. And you're talking, I think they're under maybe $75. Yeah. Probably find them cheaper used too, but they actually work. They're slow. Yeah. They're very, very slow. But unless you are planning on, being a competitor that shoots every day and every weekend and, competition, slow down, take some time, considered a relaxing hobby instead of I've got to make these, I've got to make ammo,
Yeah. Well, see, I have not done the load all approach. I kind of jumped right into a single stage press. And for those not familiar, a press is just a mechanical device that jams two things together.
Mm-hmm.
And in the reloading world, you'll use a press for multiple reloading steps. With the addition of caliber specific reloading dies, or basically metal pipes that do things like reshape your brass to its original dimensions or jam a bullet down in there and stuff like that. You'll use a single stage press for the rest of your reloading life. Even when you get fancy and start cranking it out by the thousands, you're always going to use that reloading press. It's kind of like the vice grips of reloading. Like you'll always use your vice grips, right? So I think it's a good investment. You can pick a really good one up for $100-$150. You can go more expensive from there. Lee makes, good starter ones. Lyman makes really nice single stage presses. Hornady, RCBS, all of them, easy to find. So I would probably, me personally, I would recommend, skipping right ahead to that step, because that's something, it's just a really good tool to have that you use forever.
Yep. Yeah. So you have a die and they're threaded the same. So I'm sorry. Press. You need a press.
Okay. Yeah.
So you've got your press and now you need some dies, and they're all threaded the same. So what do you look for when you're going to purchase your die set?
Mm-hmm. It's the easiest way to explain that is consider the steps, right? You're going to use the press for all of these things, but once you have a clean piece of brass, the first step you're going to do is you're going to, what we call, resize it. And you're basically using the press to jam that through a die that adheres to the factory dimensions of an unfired piece of brass for that caliber, right? So, when you fire a cartridge, everything expands inside the chamber. So the cartridge gets a little wider and to a difficult to measure degree. For pistols, a little longer, not much, but mainly wider. So you're jamming it back into shape. So it's going to fit in your chamber again the next time you load this piece of thing. So that's step one. So there is a die in the set that does that. The next die in the set kind of helps you prepare for loading powder and seating a new bullet. And that's an expander die. And what that does is that just opens up the mouth of the case just a little bit. So when you put your bullet into place, it's got a little bit of room to start its travel into the case, because it's going to be squeezed in there pretty tight, right?
Right.
These things, they often combine that step with the powder loading. So, the same die will accept a funnel or a powder dispenser on top of it to, drop some powder in after that mouth is expanded, right? So then there's a third die that is used to seat the bullet. And that's basically just, kind of helps you measure the depth to which you're going to jam that bullet into the case to achieve the proper overall length of your reloaded cartridge. So now, if you want to get fancy, there are 4 die sets that the fourth one basically helps you crimp that bullet into place, with some kind of roll or taper crimp, depending on the cartridge that you're using. So most times when I reload pistols, I use a 4 die scenario, 1 die for each step. It's a little more forgiving. If you're not trying to seat and crimp in the same operation, you size the case, you expand it, you put the bullet in place. That's it.
So what is the difference between normal dies and carbide dies? Because you see the difference, and the carbide dies are more expensive.
Laziness. No, this is good. And I'm all in favor of laziness. So I'm all in favor of carbide dies. So here's the deal on that. A carbide die, the carbide is real hard, but also kind of slippery with brass. And what I mean by that is, to resize that brass, you're mashing it back down into its original dimensions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a carbide die has a ring of carbide that is the part that actually squeezes that brass, and it doesn't stick to pistol brass. Right. So you don't need to add oil or lube, or I can't believe it's not butter or anything like that, to your brass before you resize it into shape. Now we're gonna change all this when we talk about rifles next week. But
right.
For pistol brass, carbide dies are, it's almost always what you're going to get by default. But make sure your resizing die is a carbide resizing die, because you can resize all day long and the brass won't get stuck in the die. It's that simple. And the laziness part is you're not having to lubricate the brass before you resize it.
Ah, okay.
Well worth it.
So are there any die sets to stay away from, or they all pretty much do the same, or what do you look for?
3D printed plastic ones I generally stay away from. Those don't work very well. But no, I think I tell you, and I think this is a universal thing in the shooting industry, is most companies make good stuff. We're a vocal community, and if something rotten ends up on the market, everybody knows about it. So I'm looking over at my die shelf right now. I've got Hornady dies and Dillon precision dies and Lee dies and Lyman dies and RCBS and Redding and all these different die brands, and they all work fine.
Right.
I mean, we really get into apples and oranges on specific little die features, but I have no qualms about using any of those at any time. It's hard to, I think it'd be hard to find a bad die set. I really do. Yeah.
That what confronts me when I'm looking, through the catalogs, and a single caliber, 45 ACP, they're just literally countless dies, and they're close to the same price. And it's like, just pick one, I guess. And that's what I've done. I've
probably got 3 brands of 45 ACP because some ham-fisted reloader, whose name I won't mention, breaks something now and then, and it just goes and buys another die set. So literally, when I reload some calibers, my press will have like 3 or 4 different manufacturers' dies in the different stations, just because I've broken various things over time. So they all work together too. So
there you go. Well, the next part is where it can really get out of control really fast, but it's the accessories. Now, you got to have a way to measure powder. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think there, 2 really must-have accessories, or you hit the nail on the head, is measure powder. Lee gives you a scoop system, which is for handgun loads is plenty safe. I have no qualms about that. Just follow the instructions carefully, and they help you measure powder by volume. So they've worked out for certain types of powder, a scoop of this size will give you the weight that you want, right? So they've kind of done that conversion with you. Just be sure you're using the right scoop with the right powder. All powders are different. Don't assume the number 3 scoop or whatever they call it is good for any kind of powder. Follow the directions, right? But I think you really want to start with having a scale. And nowadays digital scales are affordable. You can pick up a digital scale that's accurate for $30, right?
Yep.
You can also get yourself an old school. Remember high school chemistry? How much misbehavior we all used to do there with all that stuff. We had the little balance beam scales and stuff. Everybody makes those. And you know what? I have 2 sitting here, and I actually use them a lot, because when I'm being really careful, or I want to make sure everything's still calibrated, I'll do a test load twice. I'll measure once on my digital, one of the digitals, and I'll measure on the balance beam scale, just to make sure everything agrees. There's not much to break on one of those old-fashioned high school balance beam scales. So gotta have a scale. That and caution are gonna help you from blowing yourself up.
Yeah.
So
what's the second thing?
The second thing, I think, and can I do show and tell?
Sure.
I said we weren't going to do show and tell, but this is sitting right here, and it's easy. And people may not know what this is. It's just a set of calipers, and some of them have a dial. They're analog. A little needle goes around, and some of them are digital. They're also very affordable, and this you will use for so many things. The primary use is you're going to use it to make sure your overall cartridge length, that the bullet is seated to the right depth, and that's important. Because it's got to fit into the chamber in the magazine, but you also want to make sure it's not too short, and you're not over compressing your factory load. So that's kind of the most common use, but you'll also use this for measuring the exterior, of cartridge cases, kind of like so, to make sure you're resizing the right way. You can measure bullets. You can get yourself a set of calipers. Wise investment, and you'll use it every single time you reload for the rest of your life. So I think those are kind of 2 absolute must-have accessories. Outside of that, things start to get optional. So.
Well, talk about some of the optional stuff that you would almost nearly consider as having to have.
Mm-hmm. If I going into that, I would kind of venture into the primer world. So, after you clean the case and then resize the case, you need to put a new primer into place. And this is an explosive little thing, so you have to be careful about doing that. You don't want to use a hammer to put that thing in. Most presses, single stage presses, like we talked about earlier, will have a little lever arm of some sort that'll help you seat a primer, at the same time you're belling the case, or as a separate operation or whatever. That can be a little tedious. So I think a really good optional tool is what we call a hand primer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little squeeze type contraption where you put 100 primers at a time in there, and you just pick up a piece of brass, you stick it in there, you squeeze it, and it seats the primer for you. That is just a time saver of epic proportions to do that priming step. You can literally, sit in front of the TV while, you're watching Jeopardy or something, and load primers and do batches of hundreds at a time very quickly. So yeah. That might be one of my first optional purchases, just for efficiency and speed and ease. And you can use it with any caliber, right?
Do you
Rifles, pistols, whatever.
Do you use a formal loading block, or you just set them on your table?
I use blocks, and for those who aren't familiar, blocks are basically just plastic or wood, or trays to hold your cartridge cases in place. So once you've filled them with powder, for example, it keeps things from tipping over and spilling. And you might have a block that's just full of 50 cases of powder charged things that are ready to seat bullets in. And I like the block. They're dirt cheap because they're just pressed or molded plastic. And, it gives you an opportunity for another check. So say I'm doing a batch of pistol, right? I'm doing a batch of 45 cases, and I size them, and I expand them out, and I pour powder in, put the primer in, then I pour powder in. And now I've got a loading block, just kind of a square grid of 50 cases sitting there with powder. I can take a flashlight and just kind of shine it over the top and eyeball all those.
Yeah.
Make sure I didn't actually forget a charge or do a double charge. Just make sure everything looks kind of the same. It just gives you an opportunity for one more quality control check, so to speak.
So anything else that a novice or beginning reloader with handgun stuff really should have?
Yes. And I'm going to answer that question with two choices: an improvisational method, or a fancy official excuse to buy more tools method.
Okay.
So one step, and this step really has, I've kind of settled on the importance of this step by being stupid in the past and reloading, 200 or 300 or 500 rounds of ammo, getting to the range and figuring out they don't fit right in my gun. Right. So whether it's too wide or too long, or the bullet bulged out the case or whatever. So a really nice step in the process is to have some sort of we call it a chamber checker, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you finish your load, every so many rounds, you might want to check and make sure you're all in spec, that these are going to fit properly inside of your gun. So the easy option A is to field strip the pistol you're going to use this with, and take the barrel out and just bring the barrel only over to your reloading bench, and every now and then drop a cartridge in there and make sure it just settles into place without undue pressure or anything like that. So that's kind of a built-in chamber checker. It's not as precise as a dedicated thing, but it will tell you that at least your rounds will fit.
Right.
Or better yet, and again, we all want excuses to buy tools, right? More gear and more goodies. You can pick up some neat little chamber checking devices. Lyman makes a really nice pistol block. It's about, I don't know, if you set like 5 or 6 boxes of matches on top of each other, it's about that size, and it does, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 calibers. I forget, but 45, 9, 380, 40. And they've pre-drilled perfectly sized holes for cases. So you can check not only the exterior dimension, make sure it'll drop into place, but you can also check the headspace to make sure your cartridge is going to sit properly in the barrel and ignite reliably. and allow the slide to close and stuff like that. So I would definitely pick up one of those. That's a really, really handy piece of gear. But if you're strapped for cash, use your barrel,
Well, the final piece of this puzzle is one that you can't buy. And it was recommended to me, and I, in turn, recommend it to others. And that is learning the process. You can certainly learn it through the pages of Guns or American Handgunner Magazine, countless online sites. But everybody told me find somebody that reloads and has all their eyes and fingers intact, and have them walk you through the process.
That's good.
And I like to study things, so I've read up on it extensively. But until I got with a buddy that's an avid reloader, he taught me so many things, and that I completely agree. And it seems challenging in this day and age. If you're just getting started, how do I find somebody that does this? And then approach them and ask them to say, hey, can you take an afternoon and show me how to do this? But I think that is a really important part of this process.
Is this where we didn't talk about this, but is this where I shamelessly hijacked your podcast?
Please do.
Okay.
It's all yours.
Or here's a crazy thought. You could buy a book. Oh, guess what? I wrote one.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But seriously, let me draw a quick analogy here. If you're learning to play the piano and you go to a music store and you buy a pile of sheet music and you bring it home and you got a piano sitting in front of you, what do? Right? Missing element, right? You need to know the process. You got the recipes, right, for all the songs, which is kind of analogous to a reloading manual that gives you all those recipes. But what you don't have is the how to operate this thing. So I wrote a book called The Practical Guide to Reloading Ammunition. And it's been out for a number of years, done really well. And it is all focused on all of the steps. It will get you from zero to, near expert reloader. Kind of go through handgun, rifle, all this stuff. So you get that's the learning process. And then you combine it with the sheet music or recipes and you are good to go. So you can find that on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any of the online bookstores, and some gun stores are carrying it now, but just have to check.
But do you still recommend finding somebody and working alongside them?
I recommend finding somebody and finding a bunch of people, have them all buy my book. And then, no, I'm just kidding. No, actually, yes, I do, because that's actually one, it's fun, it's a good buddy activity, but two, you can also kind of, and I've done this a lot with friends of mine, you can kind of share your gear, right? So my son-in-law has this nifty little primer pocket swager that goes on a Hortony lock and load, progressive press. So he and I will say, hey, you want to have a reloading party? And he'll bring over some of his gear and I'll supply some of my gear. And, without each of us having to buy everything, we can do all sorts of stuff. So
I never thought of that.
That's actually a great idea to kind of get involved with a buddy or two.
Yeah. Great idea. Anything else that we haven't discussed?
Yeah, I think one, don't be intimidated. This is, it's like driving a car. You can kill yourself driving a car, but if you follow the rules and pay attention, it's perfectly safe, right? Be a defensive driver in a car and you're fine. Be a defensive reloader and you're fine. It's and what I mean by be a defensive reloader is be careful, follow the recipes, don't exceed minimums or maximum. There's companies, the reloading and bullet and powder companies have all invested millions and millions of dollars to test all of this data and know what's safe and what isn't. So trust them. Build into your process self-checking procedures. I can't tell you how many people have said, well, I don't make mistakes. Guess what? We're human. We make mistakes. It will happen. No one is perfect. You lose focus for a second or your brain thinks about something else. So build in safety checks, like you brought up the point of reloading blocks or trays. That's a great opportunity for a safety check. Use a chamber checker and spot check 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10 rounds. Make sure things are going to plan. Use your scales, use your measures. Just be careful and don't reload while you're watching TV or doing something else distracting. Focus on that activity. Safety first.
And our final point, which is something we discussed on our Gun Cranks video series, and I got quite a bit of reader mail on it, is does this save money? And it's funny, people get kind of up in arms over whatever conclusion you're going to reach, which I know what you're going to say, but just address the whole money issue.
Okay. Yes and no. So let's just assume normal times where prices of everything aren't super inflated for a temporary period, right? You technically save money on paper by reloading, primarily because you're not counting your labor, right? You know, the federal ammunition can buy primers and powder and cases a lot cheaper than we can, right? So they're saving money on those components. We get to use our cases multiple times, and that's usually the most expensive part. So we save money over them in that process. So what people really don't consider is the value of your time. If your time is worth absolutely nothing, yes, you can absolutely save money on a per round basis reloading. If you assign $5, $10, $20, $100 an hour to your time, you're not going to be saving money, right? Now the interesting thing is, and this is really what happens with reloading, is you can save money on a per round basis. You know, if you chalk it up to hobby and you don't value your time, but what you do is you shoot more. You either shoot more for the same money, or you buy lots of gear because it's fun and then shoot more, right? So it's kind of a tough question to answer.
But I think really you answered it though. You should approach this mainly as it's a fun activity that lets you shoot more, and it's kind of one of those hobbies. Once you go down the rabbit hole, you just want to keep doing more and learning more, and there's really no end to it, is there?
No, there's not. I totally get your utilitarian attitude that you talked about at the beginning of the show. And, you know, when you're getting all kinds of free ammo, who cares? I'd like it, just personal thing. It relaxes me to tinker, and I like to experiment and, you know, test things and try and optimize loads for various rifles and pistols, and optimize loads for purposes, you know, practice or whatever. So the process is fun for me.
Yeah. I've actually found that I enjoy the process because this is going to sound bad, but it's mindless. You have each step in the process that you have to do. And for me, you don't turn your brain off, but you have to get focused and just, you know, do this same procedure for 50 cases or whatever. And that's very relaxing to me because I'm working with my hands, and it doesn't require a lot of decision making. It's just, I know I have to put X number of powder in 50 cases and make sure I don't double charge or forget to charge. And by the time it's done, it's like, wow, that was really nice to not have to think and judge and evaluate. You just have to do, and you have to do it meticulously. So you got to be focused. And to me, and then the satisfaction of when it goes bang, that's pretty cool. You made that, and it went.
It is. You know, it's a great way to unwind after a rotten day at the office. You know, it takes your mind off everything else. So.
Not that we have rotten days here at Guns Magazine, American Handgunner. We're the two happiest kids in the world. I think we've got the greatest jobs in the world and a great team behind us. So, but Tom, what was the name of that book again?
The Practical Guide to Reloading Ammunition.
There you go. And do I get a little taste of the action if, you know, we sell 10,000 of them?
Oh yeah, I'll send you 10 or 20 45 cases. No problem.
That's fine and dandy. Well, Tom, thank you very much. And we'll look forward to next week's episode. And we're going to talk about rifle reloading.
Awesome. Can't wait.